Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amanda and today we are going to be doing my May 2020 reading wrap-up. I'm really excited about this month because I went through a really big emotional roller coaster, and so that ended up leading to me having a long period where I wasn't reading and then a long period where I was reading everything underneath the sun. And while emotional roller coasters are not fun, I mean, I don't like regular roller coasters, it did lead to some good progression that I needed. This was the first month this year that I had officially decided to up my reading goal on Goodreads, so I really needed to buckle down and do it, and I thought that seeing that number on Goodreads was going to be what helped me buckle down and try to read even more, but apparently determination and goodwill aren't enough to make you do something. But what I found was I tried some graphic novels again. So this month I read 19 books, which is the most I've read in a single month probably ever. Ta-da! Okay, but 19 books is like really good. Even for me, that's like unheard of good. I didn't manage to continue on with Harry Potter this month. I didn't manage to read my reread for this month, but I managed to read a lot of other stuff. These are all the physical books that I read this month. Maybe I should hide them from you until we get going. I don't know how to hold books. How does one hold books? Let's get started. Let's get started. Ooh, a feather. I am hoping to read one more book for this month, but I have a plan to do a video with it, so I just won't talk about it here because I haven't totally decided on which book it's going to be. Also, I am currently reading Radio Silence. I did put that into the 19 number because I am going to finish it. Right now it is May 28th, so I have a few days to get this done. At least this month, I'm going to be talking about series kind of as a whole, and then within those series, I'll talk to you about the individual one because I do my reading reviews in chronological order, so even if I read one later on, I'll talk about it at the same time as whenever I read the first one. So starting out the top of the month, I read the second book in the Legends of the First Empire, and later on in the month I read the third one. The first one is Age of Myth, which I read last month. I rated it 5 stars. It was awesome. The second one is called Age of Swords. I rated it 5 stars. It was pretty dang good, just not quite as good as the first one. And then the third one is called Age of War, and I liked it. I liked it a lot. I ended up rating it 5 stars. I can agree that I think it should probably be more like 4.5, 4.75, but the ending really got me, and so I decided to keep it at a 5-star just like the other ones. So this series is following a large cast of characters as they are in a epic high fantasy world, and one character, Wraith, kills a god in this world, and then they have to deal with the aftermath. So you're following the point of view of the humans in this world, and then you're following the point of view of the gods. And I put that in quotation marks because the fact that he can kill one makes everyone start to question whether or not they should actually be called gods. There is a ton of characters, and I think characters are what really make this book series stand out. I am absolutely loving the plot, but my 2 favorite things about this series are the characters and the world building. The world building is so fantastic. I really enjoy it. Enjoy learning about all the different cultures and everyone as they're getting to know more about their world and inventing things and coming up with new stuff. And it's really, really cool. I also really enjoy that this is definitely an epic fantasy, but it's like a shorter, less graphic version of one. So I think this would be a good series for someone who's maybe getting out of young adult fantasy and trying to get into new adult or just even adult fantasy, but doesn't want to necessarily tackle a 1,000-page book. I can't remember exactly how long these were, but I know the audiobooks were less than 20 hours. I think they were like 15, 16 hours. So that's not that hard to do for like a new to adult fantasy reader. I also do have to say on that they're not as dark as a lot of the other fantasy or adult fantasy that I read. Like Game of Thrones is extremely dark. I'm going to reference it because that's the one that everyone seems to know, and there's a lot of sex, blood, and violence in it. But this book, there was definitely like hints to some of those things, and there was definitely like flashbacks, but you weren't on page seeing any of that stuff. So I think this would be a good place for you to maybe dip your toes in and see if you like it. So the next book that I read was Rising by Tamara, Sloan, and Heidi, Katherine. I did do a whole video on this, so I won't talk about it very long. This book series, well, there's a series, but I've only read the first one, is about 4 teens who have to take this test in this futuristic dystopian society to figure out whether or not they can be basically considered high class or low class. And low class, a few things that kind of happen if you're put into that, and it means that 1, your left ring finger is chopped off. 2, you're not assigned a specific job, you just kind of do work as it comes to you. And 3, the biggest one, you're not allowed to breed. So no children, no family in the sense of like you're living with your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, whatever. It's more of like the community is your family. I did enjoy this book. I had a lot of issues with it. I ended up rating it 3 out of 5 stars, but I can say that since I finished that video where I talked all about it, I cannot stop thinking about this book. So there is a solid chance that I might actually continue on to the sequel. So next on the list, I read Little Women. So I ended up rating this book 3 out of 5 stars. I did read this with my mom as a buddy read because she likes a lot more of this type of story than I do, but I had heard such good things about this book that I wanted to check it out. And so we actually filmed a video together doing our like experience of reading this book together, but I haven't edited it and uploaded it yet, so hopefully in June you will be seeing that video. I'm gonna save most of my opinions for that video though. The second half of the book, I didn't like that it was basically following each of the girls individually as they were an adult doing their adult thing away from their sisters. I wish that it would have just cut off the book maybe at Meg's wedding. The next book that I read was Aurora Burning, and this is the sequel to Aurora Rising. I'm not gonna talk a ton about Aurora Burning because that will be spoilers for Aurora Rising, but I did do a video on this, so if you want to know more thoughts, go watch that video. It's a little disappointing honestly because I loved Aurora Rising and then I tolerated Aurora Burning. I ended up rating it 3 out of 5 stars, and I had a really hard time with even doing that. There was a big part of me that wanted to rate it 2 out of 5 stars, but the writing wasn't bad, so I bumped it up to 3. The next book that I read, and this one I did read physically, was Ninth House, and I also did a video on this book. Oh my god, I need to stop doing videos on individual books. So I ended up annotating this book as I was going, and I ended up rating this book 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It was so good, so fantastic. This really made me want to read more books in this genre, which I would consider fantastical contemporary stuff. Now, I cannot stand urban fantasy, but there was something about this where it's like it felt very much like it could be in our real world, but also with a hint of fantasy elements that I absolutely loved. And I guess you would just call that magical realism. There was just something about this one that I really stood out to me more than other books I've read in this genre. Maybe because it was so dark, maybe because I just love Leigh Bardugo. So the next book that I read was Sky Without Stars, and I did that for the Reading Like a Virgo reading challenge, which you can also see on my channel already. I had so much fun with that video. I know that it ended up turning out kind of more negative than positive, but I think if you watch it, you can see that I was having fun even with my negative reviews throughout the video. So this one was probably my favorite from that video, and I ended up rating it 3 out of 5 stars. And honestly, the more I think back on it, I'm like, that could also be changed to a 2 out of 5 stars, but I'm not gonna do that right now. So this book is a retelling of Les Mis, but it is like a young adult sci-fi retelling. So it takes place on another planet, and there's a lot of sci-fi elements. There's cyborgs, there's robots, like the police is all robots, and then I think like the higher ups are cyborgs, and then there's definitely like the different class systems and stuff that like France in that time had, but it's done in like a sci-fi way. A really, really good concept, and I really enjoyed the first half of the book a lot, but I think it lost some of its grandness from the original story. I talk about that in the video. The first book, Les Mis, is such a grand story where you're following so many different people, and this one lost that because you're following 3 people, 3 teenagers who I kind of stopped caring about. One of the things I really enjoyed about Les Mis was I just really enjoy when authors include a wide variety of age ranges, where you have people who are younger than 10, but also people who are older than 40, and I enjoy that. I think that that's one of my issues a lot of times with YA, is it's always seeming to be 16 years old. Like, why is it always 16? Why is it not 14? Why is it not 18? I don't know. I'm done talking about it right now. The next thing that I read was the entirety of the Paper Girls graphic novels. I only have 4 of them. Volumes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 I rated 3 out of 5 stars because they were absolutely solid. They were super confusing, but like the art was really pretty and I was intrigued. Volume 5, I rated 4 out of 5 stars because it lost a lot of its confusingness, and it really drew me in and really pulled me into the story. The one thing I can really say about these graphic novels is, so they're following 4 girls as they are starting a paper route in the 1980s, and they are the first girls, at least in this town, to have a paper route. And they kind of meet up the day after Halloween and decide to stick together because they are worried about post-Halloweeners attacking them, attacking them, and worried that if they're individual, they can get taken down, but if they're together, they are stronger. That's awesome. But then they run into this weird device that time travels them across, well, it's the same location, but across that location through all of time. And they are kind of hunted by these people who you don't totally know what they're doing until later books, so I won't say what they're doing, but it has to do with time travel. These books were enjoyable, but they were very confusing, and I felt like they brought up a lot of points that they might not have touched on enough. So one of the best things that this book talked about was that time travel, if it were to exist, should it be used to make the world a better place, or should we leave the past as it is? And I think that's something that could really be discussed long term and really in depth for a lot of people. But I think this comic didn't go as in depth as I would have liked it to. It kind of stayed surface level with that. It had LGBT representation, and it had a lot of different races representation. So I think out of the 4 main girls, I know one of them is Jewish, one of them is Asian, one of them is Black, and one of them is white. The white girl tended to say a lot of bigoted and racist and just homophobic things, and eventually she stopped saying that. I just felt like her arc wasn't in the sense of like, I'm redeeming myself from doing this. It was more of, I'm just not gonna say it out loud anymore. And I wish we would have had more background into her past as to like, why is she saying these things? Is it because she actually believes them, or is it because her family is trash and they've kind of always told her that this is how things are, so that's kind of what she thinks? Because she's still very young, so that could very well be that it's not her thoughts, it's just everything she's heard her entire life that she's repeating back to people. They were dealing with a big issue with her plotline, which is, you know, in the future she found out how her future was going to end and how it was going to continue on. And so she was dealing with that. So I think you would have had to do a few more comics to really flesh out her redeeming qualities. So the next book that I read was Binti, and I did that for a video which hasn't been posted yet, but I'll talk about it in June. So I'll just kind of quickly talk about my thoughts with you guys. Binti was a sci-fi short story about a woman who in our world would be referred to as Black, but because it's in space, I don't think they use that term. She has dark skin, and she is the first one of her people to go to this space school. And so she is meeting a lot of oppression with being the first one of her culture. So people don't understand her culture or how she looks, or like, why is her hair that way for a specific instance? Or why does she wear clothes like that? Or why does she cover herself in paint? And so she's dealing with a lot of those issues. But very quickly, the book turned to her being a cultural representation for people who had killed everyone at this school. The book took a weird turn, and I wasn't expecting it. I definitely understand the morals and all of the importance of this book. It had so many amazing and great things to say, and I definitely think a lot of people would be able to relate to the kind of things that Binti had to go through. But the writing wasn't good. It wasn't. I'm sorry. I didn't enjoy it. I ended up rating it 2 out of 5 stars because it was so short. It had to be told all to me instead of like shown to me. I think if this had been a long novel, I would have absolutely loved it. 5 out of 5 stars. So if you like short stories and you like sci-fi, I think this would be a good one for you. Even if you don't love sci-fi, I think if you enjoy short stories, you'd really enjoy this. I'm not a huge sci-fi fan, and those elements were actually pretty intriguing. So the next book that I read was In an Absent Dream, which is the 4th book in the Way We're Children series. And then later in the month, I actually read the 5th one, which is Come Tumbling Down. In an Absent Dream is unrelated to the previous stories. It just follows the same world as the other books do, and then Come Tumbling Down follows the plot from some of the previous books. This book series is about children who don't fit in quite with our world, and they find doorways to other worlds where they fit in better. Some of the stories are specifically about this main cast of like 6 or 7 characters who are together at this school where this woman, I can't remember her name right now, has built a school for children who have gone over to their world and then been forced to come back to ours. And so Come Tumbling Down follows some more kids at that school doing their thing, questing and whatnot. In an Absent Dream follows a girl who finds her doorway and comes back and forth between Earth and her world a few times because this world allows her to, and eventually she learns an ultimate lesson about that, about trying to have it all. I absolutely loved In an Absent Dream. It was full of questioning and logic and chaos, and it was so good. I ended up rating it 5 out of 5 stars. I think that I could possibly lower that to a 4.5 out of 5 stars, but I'm going to keep it at a 5-star. Really enjoyable. I liked the characters. I liked the world she went to. And even though it was a short story, it still had enough in it explained to me and not told to me that I really enjoyed it. Come Tumbling Down, I did not like. It's the only one in this series that has taken me 2 days to read. All the rest of them I read in 1 day. I rated it 2 out of 5 stars because the dialogue all of a sudden was super bad. I don't know if it was the narrator or the writing, but like both of them, I've listened to all the books so far and the narrator has been the same except for one of them. It's always been this girl. And the writing's always been Sean McGuire, so I don't know what happened, but it was super like chopped and awkward, and I didn't like it. There were characters in this book that I legitimately cared about and liked in previous books, and in this one I couldn't stand them and I didn't care to know more. And honestly, about an hour in, I was like, should I just DNF this book? And then I was like, no, it's such a short book, let's finish it. So the next book I read was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is the new prequel to The Hunger Games. And so I was actually going to do a whole entire video reviewing this book, but I very quickly decided that was not going to be the case because all I had to say about this book was bad things. I ended up rating this book 2 out of 5 stars, which I think is very fair. It is a 600-page book about President Snow when he was a teenager. And it didn't need to be 600 pages. It didn't need to be about President Snow, and it definitely didn't need to be about the 10th Hunger Games, because all of those things bored the crap out of me. The main romance in the story, unbelievable. The whole entire reason for writing this book, why was it there? This thing felt pointless. We got to watch a crappy Hunger Games, which we watched. We weren't even in the Hunger Games. We watched it as like President Snow watched it. He wasn't President Snow, but as he watched it, as he mentored a girl who was in it, this girl was super irrational. Like sometimes she'd be super psychotic and sometimes she'd be super sweet, and I like couldn't wrap my head around like, who is she? What is she doing? What is her motivation? Why is she here? What is the pointlessness of the book comes from the fact that we didn't see a side of President Snow in this book where it was like, okay, now I can kind of see why he did the things he did in The Hunger Games and other books. It was like, okay, President Snow has been bad his entire life. I literally think no different of the man, and I literally could care less. Fortunately, this book did not change my opinion of the first 3. I'm just going to live the rest of my life pretending this book didn't happen and only listening to Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay. And if they make a movie about this, I honestly would go see it because I think a movie could be pretty good. Oh my god. The next book I read was The Raven Tower, which I listened to on audiobook, and you can watch me talking about that book in the same video for Binti. Really didn't know what I was going to think of this book going into it. It was very, very weird. I have a lot of thoughts about that book, but I'm already so long in this video, I kind of want to save and let you guys watch that video to know more about it. I ended up rating it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I think upon reread, I might raise it to 5 stars, but I'm going to force myself to wait a while before I reread it because that book was odd, and I'm afraid if I reread it, that it's going to change my opinion of books moving forward. It kind of reminded me a little bit of if you mix N.K. Jemisin's The 5th Season with Erin Morgenstern's The Starless Sea, but like also it didn't remind me of those books at all. So yeah, it was a high fantasy told in second person perspective. And the story is that there is a god in this world. There's lots of gods in this world, but there's a specific one who is talking to a human about all of time. And so this god speaks of how the earth was created and speaks of his early days on the earth when there was nothing really but him. Maybe there were some other gods, he doesn't really know. And then he talks kind of going into his story of how he got to where he is. While that's all happening, the god is also telling this person what the person is doing. So the person is following his master as his master returns back to his home where he is supposed to be the next leader, and at the end of his term he must sacrifice himself to the god of this tower in order to appease him. And it's something that kind of their bloodline does. So his father was supposed to sacrifice himself, and then they had a month to get his son back in place so that his son could be the ruler for a while and then eventually sacrifice himself as well. Now when he returns to the tower, there is someone else in his seat already, and he is very angry. But because that man has not been smited by the gods, that man's argument is, well, the gods must want me in this seat, so you can just wait until next time. That's all about the master. The person that we are following, though, is just kind of watching all this happen. And it's very, very hard to talk about without spoiling anything. I think you would just have to read this book to understand it. But I will say that if you don't like second-person perspective, give the audiobook a shot. It was really good. That's how I like reading second-person perspective, because it really makes you immersed in the story. I felt like the parts where they were flashing back to like the creation of the world and the gods like moral parables that he was telling were really, really interesting, and I was really, really enjoying them. But the parts more about, I can't remember the main character's name right now, those I cared a little bit less about. Also, what's really cool is the main character is transgender and bisexual. I don't think they use either of those terms, but that's how our world would define this character. And that means that we are all caught up for everything that I've read this month. So let me know down below if you've read any of these books or if you're planning on reading any of them. I'd love to talk to you about them more, especially The Raven Tower. I feel like I have a hard time talking about that book because it's so unique, but I'd really love to find a way to talk about it, honestly. Let me know any of these books. Thanks for watching. I usually don't say that, but I do appreciate anyone who watches these videos, especially who watches to the end, because this one's a long one. Anyways, yeah, I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I'll talk to you all in the comments. Bye!